credited many with its effects. They did not go well with the critics. It gave the public a sense of qualm, which caused it to be a box office bomb. And the awards promised were all lost instead. You really had thought it ought to be dead. And who would ever suppose that was Cats the movie, the Oscar bait.
That's the movie, the Oscar bait.
Cats the movie, the Oscar bait. Who'd had ever supposed that was Cats the movie, the Oscar bait.
Great job, guys. Beautiful number. Hey, by the way, I love your part, by the way. That was really good. Oh, man, they were definitely great. But anyways, yes, there have been very few films in history that have been completely disgraced like the 2019 film adaptation of Cats. In a way, one can interpret this as one of the greatest rise and fall stories in entertainment history, started as possibly the most influential and groundbreaking modern stage musicals to the biggest recent laughingstock that came out of Hollywood. When the cast and crew were working on the feature, most were blindly unaware that this project was a hopeless disaster since its conception. But while people nowadays know that this is an entire train wreck of a picture, there are very few people that actually ask the question, why? How can a major Hollywood movie with millions of dollars invested, with big name talents, go so horribly wrong where no one with power spotted any of the warning signs of its inevitable demise? And that is exactly what we're about to find out. What you are about to experience is an unforgettable journey deep in the jellicle mind of the filmmakers, an adventure that can hopefully answer the reasons to their jellicle choices and present how passion to create the next great movie musical ultimately caused the downfall of the genre during its time. So, what curiosities killed this cat? Well, let's find out. But first, a little recap of the stage show. It all began when Andrew Lloyd Webber created an entire musical based on the 1939 collection of poems Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats by T.S. Eliot, which he was a fan since he was a boy and decided in the late 1970s to turn those poems into music. During the production, while it was tough to put on the show together, it was even tougher to sell the show to anyone, especially when the only pitch he had was just, I don't know, it's a show with cats in it. The musical made its premiere on May 11th, 1981 at the New London Theatre on the West End, and the result was a massive musical miracle.
I could just clutch myself and think, this can't be true. This can't be true. They're actually buying it.
It not only turned out to be a great success, but it is also considered to be the first true mega musical, with its numerous productions all around the world. The show made $3.5 billion by 2012 and also won numerous of awards like Tonys, Drama Desks, and Laurence Olivier's. As of 2020, it even holds the record of being the 6th longest running show in the West End and the 4th longest running show in Broadway. But the biggest reward is being awarded the reputation of being a game changer for stage musicals, turning places like the West End and Broadway into major tourist hotspots where the shows can also appeal to families. However, while it did achieve legendary levels of fame and glory, it also has another reputation that is not as glamorous. As much as it is one of the most revolutionary stage musicals, It is also known to be one of the most divided musicals, where theater fans and critics either love it and feel like its status is well earned, or absolutely hate it for being literally just 2 hours of people in cat costumes parading around with no story.
And nothing of value was lost.
But regardless of where opinions are, the fact is, it's a major hit. So much so that a movie adaptation was inevitable. But it wasn't like it waited almost 4 decades to decide to turn Cats into a feature film. There was a previous attempt back in the early 1990s to make not just a film version of Cats, but an animated version by Steven Spielberg. Yes, in 1989, Spielberg had a phase where he was more interested in developing his own animated projects, since he already produced a couple of Don Bluth films like An American Tail and The Land Before Time, and opened his own studio in London called Amblimation. Coincidentally, his office was in the same building as Andrew Lloyd Webber's, and after a chat in 1990, they agreed to make the animated Cats movie. The production of that began in 1991, after the studio's first film, An American Tail: Fievel Goes West, was pretty much finished, and immediately brought in the directors, Phil Nibelink and Simon Wells, and background designer Shelley Page to work on the project. In Spielberg's version, he wanted it to be darker, grittier, and set during World War II when the Nazis were blowing up parts of England. While several concept arts and character designs were made, there was one problem that kept this from ever seeing the light of day: the story, or more specifically, the lack of a story. That was the one thing that angered executives about the project, and as it turned out when crafting the script, there was no way you can create a traditional 3-act feature structure while also staying true to the Lloyd Webber musical and keeping those songs intact. The show was built in a way that it could never fit in an actual plot, and while Amblimation tried and tried and tried again to rewrite the script with several writers, while also continuously delaying the project, the task was ultimately impossible for them. But what really set the final nail in the coffin for the animated version was when Spielberg's focus went further away from the studio and more towards his new company that he founded with David Geffen and Jeffrey Katzenberg, DreamWorks. Sadly, Amblimation never lasted long and only ended up releasing just 3 features, all of which were box office flops, including Fievel Goes West, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, and Balto. The studio closed in 1997, and most of the animators then moved on to DreamWorks' animation division, since that was still technically under Spielberg. But with Amblimation gone, so was the Cats project. But it didn't have to wait long for the prospects of a Cats movie to actually come to life, as a film was actually made and released in 1998. Kinda, maybe, technically, not really, but... Okay, let me explain. In 1998, there was a film version of the stage musical where they literally filmed the stage musical that was meant to be released straight to home media and on television. Andrew Lloyd Webber would later do the same thing with 2 more of his musicals, like Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat and Jesus Christ Superstar. For many years, that was the closest that Cats ever had to its own movie, and following afterwards in the 2000 decade, its chances of a proper film adaptation were slipping away. Sure, Universal ended up getting the film rights, but at the time, movie musicals were not as much of a popular genre. Yeah, there were a few notable ones, but they certainly weren't as big as they were back in the 1940s and 1950s. But then came the end of 2012, where one big-name stage show turned into a feature film, and it was the moment when the popularity of movie musicals lived.
One day more.
Yes, Universal released Les Miserables, an all-star blockbuster based on the 1980 stage musical that was one of the biggest movies of its time. While the reviews from critics may not have been great, it was still a massive success, earning $441.8 million at the box office, and was one of the biggest names during awards season. From its catalogs of wins and nominations, Some of the more noteworthy ones include 4 BAFTAs and 5 additional nominations, 3 Golden Globes including Best Picture in the musical or comedy category, with an extra nomination for Best Original Song, and 3 Oscars with 5 additional nominations. At that point, Hollywood discovered their new purpose for movie musicals. Not only were they still capable of being big award magnets, but under the right circumstances, they could also be very profitable both when they hit theaters and in the long run, thus returning movie musicals in the mainstream, but with a purpose to get as much money as they can get trophies. So with the success of Les Mis, it inspired Universal to see if they can make lightning strike twice to turn another legendary Broadway show into the next major motion picture event. And since they just happen to have the film rights to Cats, which like Les Mis is one of the biggest stage musicals out there, I think it's time they put those rights to good use. And so in 2016, the mission began to turn Cats into the next Les Mis, and you'll see that Universal took that quite literally. First, we're gonna need a director. Well, if you need a director to make it like Les Mis, why not just get the director of Les Miserables, Tom Hooper? There, that was easy. And it is a bonus that he's also a major Cats fan.
I went to see it at 10 years old in its first run, the New London Theatre, and I fell in love with it as a 10-year-old. So it was that combination of kind of maybe this is the time, maybe the technology exists, and me wanting to do another musical and my love of it that all came together and started me on what's been a 7-year journey.
Next is to gather up the all-star cast, which throughout 2018, the film collected an impressive list of well-known celebrities, including Taylor Swift, Jennifer Hudson, Sir Ian McKellen, James Corden, Idris Elba, Dame Judi Dench, Jason Derulo, and Rebel Wilson. But not everyone in the cast has to have a recognizable name. On top of celebrities, the film also hired a variety of professional dancers, ranging from freestyle to musical theater to contemporary to ballet. In fact, with the latter, one of the ballet dancers, Francesca Hayward, managed to get the leading role of Victoria and earn an introducing credit. The final ingredient to complete this Les Mis copy is to create one new song for the movie. Miserables had Suddenly, so Cats would have Beautiful Ghost, created by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Taylor Swift, that would be sung by Victoria. Oh, and speaking of Victoria, since I did mention her name often, there are a few significant differences between the show and the movie. While the feature does stay very true to the source material, it didn't really have any legit story, but rather upgraded a couple of characters that only had like 1 or 2 moments to shine in the show. The first is Victoria, who is now a protagonist-ish character where the whole point is to see through her point of view as she discovers the world of Jellicle Cats. And the other is Macavity, who is now the villain that takes out the competition one by one so that he can end up as the only Jellicle choice. But back to the production. Now with everything in place, it was time to bring this Cats movie to life and start the principal photography on December of 2018. As Tom Hooper wanted to create a live-action production of the film, most of the environments were actually built sets, but everything is scaled to be about 2.5 times bigger to show a cat's perspective of the dark alleys of Soho in the 1930s. As for the actors, they got choreographer Andy Blankenbuehler to help them with the song and dance numbers, whose experience include in The Heist and Hamilton, but most importantly in this case, he did the choreography of the 2016 Broadway revival of the musical. As for the singing, again, just like Les Mis, Hooper made the cast sing their songs live as they're filming their scenes, trying to give the musical numbers more authenticity and realism to present that these cats are actually singing right in front of us. Well, keyword being try. But they weren't hired to just sing and dance. If they're gonna appear in Cats, they have to also act like cats, which is exactly why the performers had a cat school, where they had to learn how to act, move, and behave like a cat. Even Tom Hooper himself had to get cat schooled a bit when Swift had to teach him what catnip is. Wait, hold on a sec. He didn't know what catnip is? Does he? Wait. Oh god, don't tell me the director of Cats didn't know anything about the animal beforehand!
And could really only be done by a director like Tom Hooper, I think.
But I know. All these things are just minor details in comparison to the one crucial element everyone wants to know about. As interesting as the film history is at this point, it is now time for the moment we've all been waiting for. The time to finally answer the question, what the fridge is that? What the fridge is that? What the fridge is that?
We just kind of looked at each other like, okay.
Obviously, this would be the biggest challenge. If you're not gonna make an animated film, then how will you present Cats as a live-action feature? Are you gonna have the actors wear the costumes and makeup like in the stage show? Come on, dude! This is Hollywood we're talking about! Why do anything practical when you could solve all your problems with CGI? With Tom Hooper's sense of capturing realism, he wanted the cats to look both like an actual cat and a human performer, resulting in a weird combination straight out of the lab of Dr. Moreau where you take a cat and give it a human anatomy. In the original designs, the heads would have looked more like an actual cat or have a lot more cat features than have a face of a person. Guess they pulled back a bit because you don't want to shock the audience too much. You know what's funny, by the way? I actually got the Blu-ray for the sake of research, and while it does have more than 40 minutes of bonuses like the box advertises, very little does it legitimately discuss about the making of the visuals. And even when they do, they only show early test footage and the prep up that was done on set, and that's it. Also, as much as this keeps on praising Hooper, it forgot to mention the fact that he never had any previous experience in working on CG-heavy films. There might have been some visual effects done in his previous works, but never did Tom Hooper had to take the charge in a film that's so dependent on CG that it could almost be considered an animated film. So not only does this movie have a director that might not know much about domestic felines, but also has no idea how the process of computer graphics work.
And could really only be done by a director like Tom Hooper, I think.
According to one source who was a part of the visual effects crew, the production was absolute hell, and Tom Hooper was the devil torturing them all. To the artist, he was considered horrible, condescending, demeaning, and disrespectful. And whenever he has to look at a shot to see if it's good enough for the final film, he forced them to complete the whole shot by adding the fully rendered colors, textures, and lighting instead of the usual process of looking at it one step at a time to see if each element works well. And whenever a real problem would occur, Hooper wouldn't even notice it at all and might have ended up keeping that screw up in the movie. The best example of this was when at one point, one of the animators noticed that the cats had something shockingly unusual, but maybe still natural, but still unusual for the movie. A butthole. Nobody actually put them there on purpose, and they're not as in your face about it like real cats. It's just that the computers made them themselves when rendering the fur. This ultimately resulted in one guy to be hired solely for the purpose of editing out these buttholes, meaning that somewhere out there is a possible cut of the movie where these jellicle cats dance around with exposed buttholes. Hashtag release the butthole cut! But seriously, working on cats for the artists and animators was said to be almost slavery, with insane schedules that go up to 90 hours a week. For a total of 6 months, the visual effects crew managed to create the visuals for the 2-minute trailer, which was first released on July 18th, 2019, giving the public their first ever look at the long-awaited feature film adaptation of Cats. And this is where everything went horribly wrong. And judging by the amounts of likes and dislikes, this was one of those trailers that people were not afraid to say that they were hating what they were seeing. But back to the production, no matter what the reaction was to that trailer, the show must go on, and they still had to animate the rest of the movie, which they were only given 4 months to do everything. Just let that sink in for a bit. they had more time to work on the 2-minute footage to use in the trailer than they did for the rest of the nearly 2 hours of the whole movie. This ship is already sinking with no hope of salvaging it, and there is nothing they could do about it. As if it was bad enough that they made a terrible first impression, another movie made things worse for Cats by comparison to give people a sense of justification to hate towards the picture's visuals, and that was Paramount's Sonic the Hedgehog. Like Cats, its first trailer received some serious public backlash over the frightening visuals of Sonic.
Meow?
However, the director of that film responded by saying that they would update his design, and Paramount gave the budget an extra $5 million and delayed the release by a few months. When the second trailer came out with Sonic's new look, it went a lot better, and fans praised the updated design, and the film itself went on to be a hit. What this means for the movie musical was that Sonic's little update made Cats look worse than it already was, making it seem like it didn't care what people think of it, and even doubled down on its uncanny visuals when it showed its second trailer. But finally, after years of trying to turn this into a movie, a production that went through hell and back just to turn people into cats, and a budget that is said to be around $80 to $100 million, including an extra $115 million in marketing, Cats invited people to the big screen to witness the Jellicle Ball on December 20th, 2019. And that opening could not have been any worse. As expected from visuals from a CG-heavy movie that mostly had just 4 months to make, they weren't just bad, but a lot of it wasn't even finished or had time to fix up any of the glitches. As a response, a few days after the release, Universal sent to theaters an updated version of the film that was more finished and had less bugs, possibly making it the first time that a movie had to have a patch shortly after it came out. But I will say that if there is one good thing that did come from Cats' release, they did deliver some of the most creative reviews you'll ever find for a movie.
Cats is as every bit as terrible and wonderful as you hoped. A Broadway musical adaptation straight out of the litter box. Cats is a nightmare that won't end. A truly horrific failure and the year's most essential film. Cats is like a descent into madness.
The reception was so bad that even some of the actors in the movie were dissing it. Like when asked about his thoughts on the film, James Corden said that he hasn't seen it, but heard that it was terrible. Again, this is coming from James Corden, a man who is known to have a career entirely built on cringe, including this. And he's the one throwing shade at the movie. But at the box office, it went so bad that it was more painful than it was funny. As I've said before, Universal put in around $200 million in the picture, and it only managed to open in 4th on its first weekend with $6.6 million. Ultimately, the film only got $27 million domestically and a worldwide total of $73.7 million, meaning that Universal definitely lost around $100 million on this one. Some say that it was due to heavy competition at the time, like Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, Jumanji: The Next Level, and Frozen 2. But I think it's safe to say that its bad reputation and unappealing visuals is what really killed it. But possibly the saddest and most hurtful thing to happen to the movie was its chances at the awards. Keep in mind, one of its biggest purposes to follow the footsteps of Les Miserables was to be a major contender during award season. However, after its disastrous opening, Universal did something that is considered near unthinkable for a studio to do. Pull it out of its list of for your consideration, meaning that they completely canceled its entire awards campaign. The most that it had ever gotten was 1 Golden Globe nomination for Best Original Song with Beautiful Ghost and a recognition from the Kids' Choice Awards for Taylor Swift's performance. But that didn't mean it didn't win any awards at all. It's just that they're all Golden Raspberry Awards, winning such titles as Worst Screenplay, Worst Screen Combo, Worst Supporting Actor and Actress for both James Corden and Rebel Wilson, Worst Director, and Worst Picture. Then again, the movie did have a moment at the Oscars when Corden had an idea to present in one of the categories.
As cast members of the motion picture Cats,
nobody more than us understands the importance of good visual effects.
The audience may be laughing there, but certainly not the Visual Effects Society, calling out the Academy for throwing visual effects artists under the bus for the sake of a cheap joke. Oh, and did I forget to mention that one of the studios that worked on the visuals shut down not long before the release and caused many artists to lose their jobs? So yeah, this joke certainly had the same quality as the movie, and considering that it was all James Corden's idea, it really goes to show that his personality is as cringy as his career.
James, while you wait, whose idea was the Cats moment?
Yeah, it was mine. I got this email saying would I like to give one out, and I thought, well, and they said, you know, who would I like to do it with? And I said, could I do it with Rebel, and could we do it dressed as cats? And they said yes.
Which brings us to where we are today, where Cats has become the Grisabella of movies. There was a time when the name was celebrated and even once considered a standard that everybody wanted to achieve. But then this mess happened and it's now looked down upon by its peers, and the name is now associated as one of the worst movies ever made and accredited to be the one that killed award-baiting movie musicals for its time. However, like Grisabella, it is exactly why people chose the film to have a new life. Unlike other terrible movies by big studios where they're obviously soullessly made just for the sake of turning a profit, this one is horrible in a very unique way. It truly believes that this is high art, that this is the peak of cinema, but it's obvious that it has no idea what it's doing. It became so bad that it's actually entertaining. Not in the same way as other movie musicals, but more like The Room and Sharknado, where friends get together and have a blast relishing in its awfulness. In a way, at least with the movie, this is the legacy of Cats. This is how it's going to be remembered. An idea to produce the next big award-winning movie musical with what seems to be all the right ingredients for it, like a popular source material, an all-star cast, and a big-name director. But as it turned out, these things failed miraculously to combine together to form a solid feature film. The source material was never meant for the screen for its lack of story, the celebrities are turned into cat-like abominations, and the director had absolutely no idea what he was doing, especially when using tools he never used before. And while it suffered a humiliating defeat when it had its big screen debut, it did eventually find its audience. Maybe for the reasons it absolutely did not intend, but it still grew a fan base for its uniqueness nonetheless. You've heard of several kinds of movie, and my opinion now is that, you see, you should need no interpreter to understand its character. You've learned enough to take when you leave that Cats is a movie you will believe.
And nothing of value was lost.